This film is about the bearing cutter. You'll see it in close-up a little bit later on. This is just an overview. This particular one has disposable cutter tips which can be replaced when they wear out. They're actually double-sided and they're held on with these little screws here. So what's a router? Well, basically it's just an electric motor here with a device for holding a cutter here, and it cuts with a rotary action. This is called a 1/2 inch router. Here's another variation. This one's fitted with a fence to run against your material. You would operate it like this, obviously holding it with 2 hands though. Another variation, this is a laminate trimmer. Same thing, basically electric motor, the device for holding the cutter. And this one here is designed to be operated by 1 hand. Yet another variation, the Rotozip. This is designed to have a very long cutter on it. Again, a 1-hand held tool. Here's another option, the router table. Basically it's a flat table, but it's got a hand router mounted underneath. This is a CNC router. Its cutting head is in fact a hand router, but as you can see it's moved automatically through these various axes. 1/2 inch hand router, 1/4 inch router fitted with a fence. Laminate trimmer, Rotozip, CNC router, table router. That selection of machines was just a quick overview. Just in case you didn't know what a hand router or CNC router was, I just wanted to give you a few examples. So when I'm talking about the bearing cutter, it won't be a completely mysterious thing that you don't know what you actually do with. Okay, let's move on. This is the disposable tipped cutter. It's actually got 2 tips, so when one wears out you can reverse it. It actually goes into here, and this is a very, very accurately machined tool, so it fits absolutely precisely. Right, the little blades are actually held in with this screw here. Okay, that's one. That's 2. Now that I've got the blades nicely installed, I'll just describe exactly how it works. You see we've got this bearing on the end here that rotates freely, and we've got our cutting surface here. Okay, I'll just turn that around there so you can see that a bit clearer. Our cutting surface here. Now what you'll notice, hopefully, if this is a large enough picture, is that cutting edge is exactly in line with the bearing. Okay, so what does that mean then? That means that anywhere this bearing follows, whether it be a straight edge or a curved edge, the blade will cut here to exactly the same shape. So we can run the bottom on a template here, we can have our workpiece rough cut on the top, and what will happen is the blade will trim the workpiece exactly to the shape of the template. Clever stuff, eh? Incidentally, there is also a top bearing. This is exactly the same tool, but instead of the bearing being on this end here, it's at the top, for a situation that you might come across. I'll just show them together so you get the idea. Got the shank here at the bottom that goes into the machine. Got the cutting edges there. one with a bearing on the bottom, or no, one with a bearing on the top, one with a bearing on the bottom. But of course, to confuse the issue, that all depends whether you're using it in a hand router up this way or in the table router up this way. I suppose you could even use it on its side in some circumstances. Just need to give these screws a final tighten to make sure they're nice and firm. Okay, that's ready to rock and roll now. For this particular operation, we're going to use the cutter in the router table. So I'm just going to install that. Just fits down here. Don't want the cutter all the way into the collet. Okay, want to back it off a little bit. It's got a device where you lock the spindle. This spanner here. Just give that a little tighten up. There you go. That's brilliant. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this particular device here, which will clamp on. It'll take the dust away, and also this here will act as a little guard to protect us from the cutter. Right, there we go. Just securing that in position with the G-crank. Here's another shot of the hand router mounted in the table. If you see, look, if we have the camera upside down, you can actually see how that would be used as a hand router. We've got it upside down in the table here. Got our little guard here to cover the actual cutter, and as you can see here, here's the tube that takes the chippings, dust, etc. away to the outside dust extraction unit. Here's an example of the or one type of template that we might use in conjunction with the bearing cutter. What we want to make here is a series of these semicircular sections to make up a jig. So what I would do here is I'd first of all use my jig as a template to draw around my material like so. Now what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to cut that out in the bandsaw. Right, now then, as you can see, that's the bandsaw is a freehand machine. Because it's cut by hand, it's not a particularly consistent curve. Also the edges are quite rough from the coarseness of the teeth on the blade. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, this here was actually made on the CNC router, this shape here, so that's perfectly smooth, geometrically correct. So my bearing cutter is going to follow this, and it's going to turn this slightly off shape bit into an exact copy. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pin that on there. They were pins that I'd prepared earlier in true Blue Peter style template. Okay. We've got our workpiece pinned to it. Okay, and here we've got this surface which the bearing here is going to run off of, and the cutter, because remember, as I mentioned, the cutting blade is exactly in line with the bearing. What that means is it will trim down our works piece, this you can see the excess here, to exactly the same size and shape as the template. Incidentally, the guard had been removed just so I can get a better bit of light in to show you exactly what's going to happen. Okay, here we go. In a minute I'm going to don my PPE, my personal protective equipment, which you can see on the router table there, the visor and ear defenders. Then I'm going to switch on the extraction, switch on the machine, and make the gut. Now then, did you notice then that I waited for the cutter to stop revolving before I left the machine and switched off the... Okay, so here we see the finished article. Let's just prise that off there. Okay, got to remember to knock those nails out to make it nice and safe. But we can repeat that process. We can make as many of these as we like. They'll be identical, and what we'd be able to do is build them together like this to make a former out of the various sections. Then we can laminate some material over. As you can see, here is a nice piece of mahogany which we've put into the CNC machine, and we've cut this really nice shape out. Now unfortunately we didn't have a cutter long enough to go right the way through, so what we're going to do is we're going to bandsaw this shape out now a little bit away from the finished line, and then our bearing, instead of running on a template, is actually going to run on the surface that was created by the CNC router. Now it's quite often we get a circumstance where we do a little bit on the CNC machine and finish off with the bearing cutter. In particular here I can think of just cut this out on the bandsaw. Okay, so get rid of that bit there. Now then, look, you can see we've got the edge here cut originally by the CNC router, and we've got the overhang of the material which I'm going to trim off using the bearing cutter. Now then, we've got nice smooth edge here. There are one or two discrepancies, but that's just where the CNC router threw a bit of a wobbly. But, as you can see there, or saw there, as you saw there, there was no template used. What is a router and what does it do? Basically, it's an electric motor with a device to hold the cutter. The cutters can trim, they can cut a groove, they can cut profiles. We're going to have a look at a chart with a few cutters shown on them. By the way, this is me when I was at school in 1970, in what we used to call the first year then, which you would call year 7. I think I've sort of lasted quite well. Here's a chart showing various cutters. There's a straight cutter, there's a round one. These are what we call profile cutters here. It's actually got a bearing on it there. Look, there's another cutter. Up here, look, we've got an actual combination cutter here where there's two, and they can make a section. Where make two sections, one which fits into the other. It's a router is a very, very versatile machine. There's a grooving cutter there. This film is only going to last about 5 minutes or so. You could make a whole series about the machine. It's just so versatile. Little plug there for CMT. They might even see this and send us a few router cutters. Here's an example of a bit of work done with a router cutter. It should really conventionally be done with a spindle moulder, but that's a very big, expensive machine. So we had a set, well I had a set of cutters here, and I've made up, this is just a little test piece here of a frame, and as you can see it's got a profile down here, and it's got your mortise and tenon joints here. Okay, now this is what we call scribing over, where the actual joint actually the shoulder of the joint fits over the profile that goes along the long edge. And there you go. That was made with a CMT combination router cutter set. Okay.